This is a huge topic, and I'm going to start out with a kind of an apology because it can be kind of dense. But what I want to do, my aim is to really inspire you to read this book. So I'm going to do my best to kind of summarize the things that lead up to the topic that I wanted to talk about tonight. I think in order to understand the topic, you need a little bit of background. You need some context. And so that's what I'm going to do my best to achieve. So let me just quickly check my notes. I do want to say another thing about this book. This book was published after Ty's passing, and so it was put together by the monks and nuns in Plum Village primarily, and it addresses, just like the topic said, the title says, it addresses the current situations that we are living in and the dangers that we face. And it also talks about possible remedies. But all of those remedies depend a lot on us. And I'll get to that as I talk about the book a little more. I think what I have discovered in reading this book is that in spite of all of the crises that we are facing, there is not only hope, but there is a role that we can play, whether we want to be really, really active or whether we want to be active in what I'm going to talk about as a non-active way. So it's just, I find incredibly relevant, which is why I wanted to share this with you. So I'll be using some slides to present the a few excerpts from the book. And there's nothing beautiful about these slides, it's just words. But I'm personally a visual learner, so I think sometimes if you actually see the words, it makes a little more sense. So let's begin with the slides. The first slide will be actually a picture of the book title, book cover. This is what the book looks like. I love this picture of Ty in his meditative stance. And the next slide. So in the, let me see, I just wanted to see if you can read that, okay. This is from the preface of the book. So I'm starting at the very beginning. In this preface, which is written by Sister True Dedication, she says that Ty teaches that to practice meditation is to look deeply into the heart of reality, to see things that others can't see. And as Ty says, once there is seeing, there must be acting. Otherwise, what's the use of seeing? Skipping down a bit in her preface, she points out that in this very moment, we face a potent intersection of crises: ecological destruction, climate breakdown, rising inequality, exploitation, racial injustice, and the lasting impacts of a devastating pandemic. The situation is beyond urgent. She says that at the very beginning of the book so that we understand this is not just light reading. This is an urgent situation. Let's go to the next slide. So she says that cultivating a strong training in meditation and mindfulness is not an opiate to escape what's going on, but it's a way for us to truly still the mind and look deeply in order to see ourselves and the world clearly. From this foundation of clarity and insight, we'll be able to take the most appropriate, effective action to transform the situation and create a regenerative culture in which all life is respected. You know, I was struck when I began reading this to see how much the voice of Sister True Dedication is so similar to Ty. She writes beautifully, but I also found out by reading this that she was at one time, before she became a nun, she was a journalist for the BBC. So, you know, that kind of explains how she knows she writes so beautifully. So she's also telling us here that we're going to learn, we're going to have an opportunity to create a foundation that will help us take effective action. I can't see the bottom of that, but Ty encourages us to boldly reimagine an entirely new way of living and doing things, and to never be afraid to dream. And he reminds us, no matter what, to always work together, never alone. Which reminds me of Ty's, I don't know if it was a quip or, I know he really meant it, but he said the next Buddha may be a Sangha. So the next slide. So the first part of this book is called Radical Insight. And the last thing I just read was that Ty, let me see if I can say that again. Ty encourages us to boldly reimagine an entirely new way of living and doing things. So here you go, radical insight, a new way of seeing. This first part is written by Sister True Dedication again, and she titles it, "Are You Sitting Comfortably?" She says, at pretty close to the beginning, maybe I'll actually read that. This is the first sentence in this particular section. Ty is blazingly clear. There's one thing that we have the power to change, which will make all the difference, and that is our mind. I want to read this part, which I didn't put on the slide. She said, "We may want the world to wake up and act, but what kind of awakening would actually be helpful? What do we need to wake up to?" I'd like you to kind of keep those questions in your mind as we go through this, and particularly the question, what do we need to wake up to? And then Ty said, we need to wake up to what's going on at both levels of truth, the relative truth and the ultimate truth. And I know I've done several talks on relative and ultimate truth, so I'm kind of hoping you remember some of it. But basically, relative truth is what we're going through in this historical dimension. And the ultimate truth is what we aspire to with this practice. And it's important to be able to look at what's going on both levels, because we are in both levels simultaneously. We have dual citizenship in the historical dimension and the ultimate dimension, or truth, as sometimes this word says. So Ty says, if we're going to help our society and planet, we need to wake up to what's going on at both levels of truth. I'm skipping some parts of this book, not because they're not important, but because I don't want us to be here till 10 o'clock tonight. So the next part I want to talk about is this little, it's called Spring Thunder. Ty is talking about how some Zen masters would actually either sneak up on somebody who is not really meditating and whack them with a stick, or shout at them. And he says, Ty says that is called the lion's roar, or it's also, it's like thunder. So it wakes people up, and with the wake up and the thunder, then we get rain, grasses, flowers bloom, that sort of thing. So the point he's making is we cannot change the world if we're not able to change our way of thinking, to change our consciousness. Okay, next slide. These are some of the important bits in this first section called Radical Insight, and I'm only going to touch on them. As I said, I don't really want it to take all night, but also I think it's important for you to kind of get some background before we get to the one part I wanted to talk about tonight. So the first, and these are all little essays or readings in the book. This is called Eternity in the Present Moment. And one of the things that I was startled to read, and it kind of shook me up. He said in this book, in this part, the extinction of species is taking place every day. Researchers estimate that every year over 20,000 species go extinct, and the rate is accelerating. And he goes on to say that it's not impossible for humans to become extinct. There have been several mass extinctions on the earth, and the earth always comes back, but it takes, a few billion years for that to happen. So what he's saying is that we have to learn to accept and kind of, realize that the reality is that we might actually be facing the extinction of humans if things don't change. Now, I don't think that he's saying this is going to happen next year or even 20 or 30 years from now, but for some people it will make a big difference. And it also says to me that before extinction actually happens, there will be lots of difficulties, lots of challenges. So the next little section in the book is called Zen Roots. And in this, Ty gives a brief history of how Buddhist meditation tradition happened in Vietnam. I'm only going to tell you a little bit, but it happened, I don't think he says exactly when, but it was quite, like a few centuries ago. It started with a traveler, a merchant from Asia who went to Vietnam, and Ty speculates he might have been using what was called the Maritime Silk Road. Anyway, this young merchant really liked Vietnam. He married a woman there. They had a little boy, and this little boy was named Tung Ho. Tung Ho, when he was 10 years old, his mother and his father died, and he was taken in by a Buddhist temple and trained to be a monk. So he became a really, really important teacher in Vietnam. And then also many people, no, let me read this part. He built the first Buddhist temple in the Wu Kingdom, which is Nanking today, Nanking. This temple became the first built temple. And if you go to Nanking today, you can still see its ruins. So I think Ty just really wanted us to get a sense of the antiquity, our ancestors in this tradition. And then the next part of the book is called Diamond Breakthrough. And this is a section that is talking about the Diamond Sutra. And it's obviously not the whole thing, but in this description, the Diamond Sutra says there are 4 notions we need to throw away because they're impediments to awakening. And Ty likes the fact that this monk used the words throwing away instead of letting go, because it's much more permanent. If you throw it away, you're done with it. And so the 4 notions that we need to let go of, that we need to throw away, are, the first notion is the notion of self, or a separate self. And we know about this, we've learned this before. We cannot say that there is a separate self. We are so connected with one another, with our environment. We are inextricably linked to everything. There is no separation between us and the whole universe. So we have to throw away this idea of a separate self. The second notion is human being. I found this one to be kind of interesting because I never thought about it that way. But we are not, he says we can't be called human beings because we are made of non-human elements. And so, you know, you can't call us a human being. He also says that we need to throw away the notion of living beings. And that's because living beings implies that inanimate objects are not included. But that's not true because we have mineral elements in us. So we can't say living beings. And the 4th notion is to give up the idea of lifespan. Because as Buddhism teaches us, we're never born and we never die. We just manifest and then we go away and become something else. Let me see, I was going to read something here. Oh, it's a story from something that happened with Buddha and his monks. It's from the Sutra of 42 chapters. So one day the Buddha asked his monks, how long does a lifetime last? And one of them said, oh, 100 years. The Buddha smiled. Another monk said 20 years. And another said 1 day. And then one monk said the length of a single breath. And the Buddha said, yes, that is correct. We are being reborn in every breath. Today's you is already a new lifetime succeeding yesterday's you. So we have to throw away the notion of a lifespan. So now I'm going to skip about 50 pages of really good stuff so that I can talk about the thing I said I was going to talk about. But I think I hope I've given you enough context to kind of get a sense of how this part fits in with it. So the topic I said was finding balance, the art of non-action. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is the action dimension. I don't know if I read this, but Ty said, I think I just failed to read it, but Ty said that he thought we need another dimension, or we need the historical dimension, we need the ultimate dimension, and we also need the action dimension. So this is what he said about the action dimension. The enlightened person's way of being is the most fundamental positive contribution Zen makes to the world. Zen is a living tradition, one that can train people in this understanding and in a way of life that is healthy, resilient, and balanced. Whether or not we can cultivate these qualities of ease and freedom is a question of awakening. The world doesn't need another ideology or doctrine, but the kind of awakening that can restore our spiritual strength. And that's when he begins to talk about the action dimension. Sorry, I'm lost my place in the book. Next slide. So before we can talk about action, we need to understand the connection between action and what Ty calls non-action. So he said that action is based on the foundation of being. Is your foundation peace, understanding, and tolerance? Is your foundation anger, fear, and anxiety? The quality of your action depends on the quality of being. And I've also spoken about this before, how your actions are manifestations of your way of being, which is why when we make an intention for a way to be, we are saying, this is what I intend to act on. We don't, well, and I'm not going into that too much more. So the quality of being is important. And that's when we begin to look within to see, am I being peaceful? Am I being understanding? Am I being tolerant? Am I being angry, fearful, anxious? And you could go on with other qualities as well. I want to pause here for just a second. Maybe I'm just going to, I see you look really like you're paying attention. So that's interesting. I like that. But one of the things that it occurred to me is that a foundation of being will often be predicated on what we value. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to just kind of shout out, what do you value? When I first thought of this, the first thing that came to my mind was honesty. What comes to your mind when you think about what you value in other people or in yourself? Love.
Understanding.
Compassion.
Kindness.
Kindness.
Creativity.
Creativity.
Respect.
Peace. Respect.
Understanding.
Understanding.
Authenticity.
Sorry?
Authenticity.
Authenticity.
Consistency.
Consistency. Yeah, these are very important qualities. And these are the kinds of things that those qualities will enable us to really take some meaningful action. So what is the action of non-action? Well, Ty says it's characterized by doing things in a relaxed and joyful way. Actions become a true expression of our love, our care, and awakening of the things you just mentioned: respect, honesty. So these kinds of actions are grounded in meditation and mindfulness and acting out of love, which brings happiness. So this action of non-action really involves what we do here: meditation, sharing with one another, being supportive of one another. And I'm sure you are supportive of other friends and family in your life. So you may already be doing a lot of these kinds of actions of non-action. You don't have to be like, walking the streets in a protest. There are plenty of things we can do in this more loving, relaxed way of non-action. Is there another? I want to go to the next slide. Is there another slide?
Yes.
So this is one way we do it. We train the mind. And this may remind you of the 5 mindfulness trainings or other things you've read. Ty describes, Sister True Dedication wrote this. Ty describes mindfulness as a path, not a tool. It's not a tool to get something, even if that something is relaxation, concentration, peace, or awakening. It's not an ends to a means to an end, sorry, a means to improve productivity, wealth, or success. In true mindfulness, we arrive at the destination every step of the way. That destination is compassion, freedom, awakening, peace, and non-fear. If the insight you get from mindfulness is real, it will change how you see the world and how you want to live. If you have taken the 5 mindfulness trainings and have been doing your best to live according to them, I'm sure you have noticed how that has changed your view of the world and how you live in it. Next. Nonviolence is a path, not a tactic. I think I'm probably the only person in the room who's old enough to have been around when Martin Luther King Jr. Organized nonviolent protests. And most of the time, the protests were peaceful, but there are times when they weren't. And this is, I think this part is one of the parts that I really found most useful. So let's, so these are just my takeaways from this part of this book. I just read, nonviolence is not a strategy, a skill, or a tactic to arrive at some kind of goal. It springs from understanding and compassion. If you become dogmatic about not being nonviolent, you are no longer nonviolent. You know, all of those protests you might see where people are saying, what do we want? Peace. When do we want it? Now. Well, that's not nonviolent. That's you can see the anger in that kind of a protest. So we want to help people remove that kind of thing, remove the discrimination, the recrimination, the othering, like seeing people divided, us and them. So we want to help remove those kinds of things. Violence comes from discrimination, hatred, fear, and anger. And discrimination itself is a kind of violence. This is a part that I think we all need to really take note of. Nonviolence can never be absolute. You always have to choose. Don't ask for the absolute. Do your best to minimize violence. Your best is good enough. He also is more explicit by that. He says, you can't be 100% nonviolent. It's like the 5 mindfulness trainings or the 14 mindfulness trainings. We can't do all of those things perfectly, but we can do the best we can. And the best we can is good enough because it begins to change how we live and how we view life and people around us. So he says, nonviolence can never be absolute. Don't ask for it. We only have to do our best, and that is good enough. It's like nonviolence, he says, is like the North Star. You can head in that direction, but you're not ever going to get to the North Star. Next. There are many ways that violence can appear, and they appear in our minds. If our thoughts are full of anger, fear, and misunderstanding, they can transform our minds into a battlefield. So you're having a war within yourself. But suppressing or resisting your feelings can also be a kind of psychological violence. An economic system can be violent. And we can witness that every day. So how do we transform this inner violence? Well, first we have to recognize the inner violence, recognize there's fear, there's anger, there's even hatred. All of those labels might come up. And when you recognize that there is that inner conflict, Ty says, allow the energy of mindfulness to gently embrace and penetrate whatever feeling is there. In other words, he's talking about watering the good seeds and not watering the seeds of inner conflict. This is the teaching about watering the wholesome, beneficial seeds in your store consciousness when you notice that you're feeling or thinking in a way that's harmful. I can't see the whole screen.
Causing
can't see
suffering
them.
for yourself and others.
Oh, okay, thank you. I don't see it on my screen. Okay, I think we're almost done. And have you been thinking about what kind of transformation do you want for yourself, for the world? Here are ways to be engaged. Thich Nhat Hanh kind of championed engaged Buddhism by the way that he worked and dealt with the war in Vietnam. So what he suggests is that you help when you can act out of compassion. And he also said, remember, you don't have to die to get your message across. And remember that protesting may not be able to remove the fear, the anger, and the craving in the people that we are protesting against. So real protest would help them wake up and take a new direction. And how do we do that? He says, this is a way we can set an example by creating a community of peace and true solidarity, by consuming in a way that protects the planet, by speaking and listening in a way that transforms anger and division, by living happily in the present moment. These are all engaged actions. And Of course, there are actions that can be more physical. But for me, this is a place to start. I don't see myself walking in a protest anywhere. In fact, I remember hearing that Mother Teresa said one time when somebody asked her to join a protest march, she said she couldn't participate in that because that was not a genuine way to get peace. Which I think is very true. So let's go back to the questions. I think that's the end. Oh, no. Oh, this is an important story. I'm sorry, y'all. I didn't know this was going to take so long, but hanging in there. We're almost done. This is a really important story. This happened in Vietnam, and some of you may already know about this, but not taking sides is what he and his followers did. They refused to align themselves with the North Vietnamese or the South Vietnamese or the Americans. And so they were in a very precarious and dangerous situation. During the war, Thai and his helpers in the School of Youth for Social Service were threatened, armed, and killed. They were labeled as enemies by both the North and South Vietnamese armies. One time, there was a point at which they were in their place of, I don't know what to call it. It wasn't like a compound, but where they had their services and met. And so they were met by an armed men who captured 5 of their people and took them away. They took them to the banks of the river and questioned them quite a bit. And then they asked each of them, "Are you a member of the School of Youth for Social Service?" And they said yes. And so then the aggressors said, "We're very sorry, but we have orders to shoot you." And they did. They shot them, all 5 of them. One of the young men fell into the river and actually survived, and that's how they know what was said. So because the attackers said "we are sorry" before they shot the social workers, they knew that these young men did not want to kill them, but they suspected that if they didn't do this, they themselves would be killed. And so in the eulogy afterwards, they made a point of saying that the leaders of the School of Youth for Social Service clearly said that despite the attack, they still did not see the killers as the enemy. And Ty says there were no more attacks on the school after that. Maybe they were following us closely and heard what was said. So that is a way to make a nonviolent action. Last thing, Ty says, our enemy is not other people. Our enemy is hatred, violence, discrimination, and fear. So let's take a break, take a pause, breathe. You can turn this off if you will, Paul. So there was that question at the beginning that Sister D wrote. What do we need to wake up to? What do you need to wake up to? What do I need to wake up to? I need to wake up to the many ways in which I label people and it cause a sense of separation between me and the other person. What do you need to wake up to within yourself?
What I